are going to be chatting about not only job search strategies, but actually creating a plan. And to do that effectively, while we can't necessarily get out of the house and we have to kind of operate from the safety of our home. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump right in. So just a brief introduction of myself. So my name is Brett Ellis. I am a career coach here with Udacity. I've been here since April of 2019, so a little over a year. Most of my background is working with college students, graduate students, and really in the higher education space. But I really enjoyed the career development aspect of working with students and helping them transition into full-time roles. I also like to make it clear that, you know, certain career coaches have certain areas of expertise. So if you're ever interested in chatting with a career coach about specifically about things like personal branding, LinkedIn, and networking, that's kind of an area that I specialize in. And so if you have opportunities to do that, feel free to reach out. And this is really kind of my favorite part of this role, is being able to engage with different groups and have you all participate in a common learning experience. And, you know, feel free to ask any questions that you have throughout. My goal is to make this as interactive as possible. So if you ever have a question or ever have a comment or just want to chime in, feel free to unmute your mic as well. We don't have to just primarily use the chat, but if that's what you're comfortable with, we can do that as well. So today we're going to be talking about the importance of referrals and why they are so important and why it's impactful from a business perspective and why you should include that as part of your job search. Then we're going to jump into an actual strategy or a plan that you can start utilizing as early as today to start making more progress towards your goals. And I'll talk about why that's important when we talk about the planning section of it. Then we'll talk about networking and relationship building, because that is going to be a key way for you to start landing some of those referrals. And you probably heard that you should be doing this, but I'll give you some intentional things that you can actually start implementing soon. And then we'll talk about personal branding, where I feel is often kind of left out of the conversation as it relates to job searching, but can be one of the most effective strategies for you to implement as it relates to you transitioning into your ideal next step. And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A towards the end. It looks like we have about 17 people in here, so it is a fairly small group. As I mentioned, feel free to jump off your mic or unmute your video, whatever, as we can kind of keep this a little bit more engaged that way. But once again, the chat function is perfectly fine to use as well. So I want to hear from you. Find your way to the chat again. If you haven't, I want to hear from as many people as possible. Do you have an intentional job search strategy, or do you have a plan, a job search plan at all? Is it written down? I want you to answer in the chat and then give me some context if you do have a plan. I want to see where everybody's at so I can navigate this conversation a little bit more intentionally myself. So find the chat or unmute your mic and let me know what your plan is, or if you have a plan. So Susan says she does not have a plan. That is okay. That's what we're here to do today. So if you don't have a plan, that is fine. That's what we're going to help you figure out today. Daniela says, no, not really. So hopefully we can get you on the right track as well. Anybody else? Tony says, find job postings that I feel fit my skills, submit applications with cover letters, and hope for the best. So Tony, I might pick on you a little bit today, but it's only out of love. I think that that's what most job seekers tend to do. And I want to kind of show you a more effective strategy that you might not necessarily have thought of. So thank you for sharing that. Let's see, just LinkedIn alerts, job portals, LinkedIn, nope, send resumes. Okay, so you might have started to see how effective that process is as well. So for some of you who have been doing these things, may not have necessarily been working too well. So I really want to kind of dive in and make sure that you all are focusing your time and your energy on things that are going to provide you with more return on your investment while you are job searching, because it can be a very lengthy process sometimes. It can be a very challenging emotional journey for you as well. And so having a plan and having a sense of control will help you to feel like you are actually making progress towards the goals that you have. So that is also my goal today, and what I hope you all will kind of take away from this session. So thank you all for jumping in and sharing. It's not always the easiest thing to do to say we need help, but I appreciate everybody who did share in the comments. Stay stay engaged, so we can have a more back and forth kind of conversation. So yeah, as I kind of mentioned very briefly, this is the strategy that I see most job seekers take. So I call it the reactive approach. And that's because you're seeing an opening or you're aware of an opening and then you're reacting to it. And the reason why this can be a little bit challenging is because sometimes you're already behind when you see that posting. You may see that posting was listed 5 days ago. Some companies are moving so quickly that they may already start reviewing resumes by the 6th or 7th day. Some may be drawn out a little bit further, but you want to try to get in on the proactive side so that you're aware immediately when positions become available and you can navigate other processes of finding jobs other than just applying for them online. So that is my goal today, as I mentioned before, but this is kind of the reactive approach that I see most job seekers take. And to be completely honest with you, a not very successful approach is this kind of awareness of job openings and then applying online. One of the reasons why it's not effective is because that's what most people are doing. And any way that you can stand out in the job search process is going to be good for you. So that is what we're going to focus on today. We have a question before we jump in. Hi, is it a good idea to start applying for jobs finished first project and working on second project? So I think it depends more on the experience that you're bringing previously. I don't think that having 1 or 2 projects under your belt is going to be enough to qualify you for any job. So I think that's probably more a one-on-one question that you want to kind of process through with a career coach, just because that is a little bit more in depth than just a simple, quick answer. But yeah, any questions, feel free to keep them coming. I'm monitoring those as I'm presenting the webinar as well. So let's talk about why this process is not very effective. So depending on the research that you'll see, depending on the source, you'll find that this kind of number between 70 to 85% of jobs are not posted online. So that bullet alone should kind of shock some people out of going this route, at least as their plan A. My goal with this session is not to discourage you from applying for jobs online at all, but I do want you to move it down on your list of priorities and kind of focus on some things that are going to be a little bit more impactful. Another thing to consider is that most major companies use what are called applicant tracking systems. So some of you might be familiar with what those are. I think people are starting to learn a little bit more about what they're about, but if not, the next slide, I'm going to go through that a little bit more in detail. So if you don't know what that means, that's okay. Just stay tuned for the next slide. And then another thing to consider is thinking about this from a business perspective. I think a lot of job seekers don't take the time to put themselves in the position of somebody who's hiring. And so they don't often fully think through like what would be the most effective or what would I want to see from someone who was interested in working for me. So one of the things that we'll talk about is how employers prefer to hire these professionals with relevant experience. So sometimes just completing a nano degree or just completing a college degree or just completing a course is not necessarily going to be enough to land jobs. You have to pair that with really good experience and applying the things that you're learning. So they're looking for that, but they're also doing some candidate sourcing of their own through platforms like LinkedIn, where they're not necessarily reviewing all the applications that are coming in, but they are actively seeking the type of candidate that they want. So they have an idea in mind of who they want to work for them, and they use LinkedIn as a way to find it. We'll talk about a similar strategy for how you can kind of do the reverse. And then through referrals. Referrals are extremely important because referrals are basically someone at the company saying, I think this person would be a good fit for this role. So you have somebody on the inside who's potentially already a good employee saying they have another person who could be a really good employee at this company. And from a business perspective, from a hiring perspective, it makes a lot of sense to prioritize that because you have kind of that word of mouth and someone you trust versus having to go through an entire interview process or reviewing a ton of resumes and filtering through people when you already have kind of an ideal candidate or maybe several candidates in front of you already. Let's see. Yeah, Yahia, and if you can correct me if I'm saying it incorrectly. The main problem in landing a job is experience. They suggest you know a ton of info even as a junior. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that that's relevant for a lot of different industries. And so I think as early as you can start gaining some experience and applying what you're learning, the better. But if you want to talk about that a little bit further, I can forward you to another webinar that I facilitated with Udacity a couple of months ago. It's around gaining experience. So if we have time towards the Q&A, remind me and I'll drop the link for that in the chat. But yeah, these are just a couple of reasons why applying online is just not the most effective strategy that you can implement. And once again, this is not to say to avoid doing it completely, but maybe include that as just part of your strategy and not the entire part. So as I mentioned before, I did want to do just kind of brief overview of applicant tracking systems for those of you who might not be familiar. And some of you may have been applying for jobs and wondering why you're not hearing back, and this could be the culprit here. So applicant tracking systems are basically software platforms that are designed to filter out applications through the use of keywords. So they're not filtering in, which means they're trying their best to remove anybody who might not be qualified for the role. And the reason why this is important is because, you know, several years ago, you had to potentially go to the library, type up a resume, print it off, mail it off, get a stamp, and do all these things. Now, with the ease of applying online, really there's no barrier to entry for anybody applying for any job from anywhere at any time. And so companies have had a really difficult time keeping up with the amount of applications that they're getting. And so they've had to implement these systems to filter out as much as they can people who they deem not qualified. And the challenging part about that is they're kind of making that, they're setting that criteria based on keywords. And so those keywords are going to be coming directly from job descriptions. So if you see a position as a front-end developer that you want to apply for, and your resume doesn't do a good job of matching that in terms of the keywords that they've deemed most important, then you might be getting filtered out by a software platform before a human ever actually sees your resume, you know, with their own eyes. So it's important for you to keep in mind that a lot of major companies use these systems, and this is another, just kind of adding another layer to why applying for jobs online is a lot more challenging. And so if you are going to go the route of applying for jobs online, you need to be aware of these applicant tracking systems so that you are reminded to always, always, always tailor your resume for the position that you're applying for. I know that, you know, some people might have heard that, but have not necessarily thought that it was necessary. It is if you want to compete for some of the bigger companies and the companies that use applicant tracking systems, because even if you created a resume that is tailored to keywords for one company, those keywords might look completely different for the other one. So it's important that you always tailor your resumes when applying. And once again, you can start to see how this might take up a lot of time. There's very, very little, you know, return on investment for that time that you're spending. So we're talking potentially 30 minutes to an hour tailoring a resume to fit keywords, but then also potentially writing a cover letter on top of it. I personally feel like that time could be spent more effectively elsewhere. Sorry, let me go back. But yeah, just to keep all of these things in mind. But if you are going to be applying for jobs online, you should be tailoring those resumes every single time and aware of these applicant tracking systems. Here are a couple of resources just on the right side that can help you navigate these ATS systems. So skillsyncer.com is a great resource where you can actually copy and paste your resume next to the job description, and it will give you somewhat of a score that lets you know how well you might perform in an ATS. They're not going to be 100% accurate though, because a lot of companies use different ATS systems. There are different providers for that. And JobScan basically does the same thing, but one thing to note is that through SkillSyncer, military and students get a year free. I don't know if that applies to more traditional university degrees or if nano degrees would apply, but you can always reach out to their support team and ask that. Tony says, that is why I only apply to like 3 to 5 jobs a week due to the time they take. Yes, and that is good to a certain extent because you want to focus on quality. I hear a lot of people say, I applied for 50 jobs this week, and I had to think to myself, do you really see yourself engaged or doing well at all 50 companies that you applied for. It seems a little bit out there. And I think that when you start getting into that process of applying to jobs and applying and applying and applying, it's almost like running on a hamster wheel. You're just kind of running in place and not really getting anywhere. And so I want us to start thinking of having a plan that is a little bit more beginning and end, and we can take tangible steps to get to that point. So yeah, if there are any questions about ATS systems, please drop them in the chat. I'll make sure to get to those, but I want to make sure this is clear. This is a really, really important to understand for anybody who's going through a job search. Okay, so now let's talk about a strategy, and you can kind of formulate this into a plan as well. So if it helps, feel free to take a screenshot or take a picture with your phone. This is probably something that you'll refer back to. We're obviously not going to have enough time for everybody to create a full job search plan right now, but you can come back to these on your own time and really take some time to brainstorm and reflect and think through and even prepare questions that you can potentially share when you have a one-on-one with a coach, or just in your student hub or group chat. Ask these questions. Be very intentional through this process. So we'll start at the top. So this is what I would say is like the first step. And usually any career coaching call that I'm having with a Udacity student, this is really the first call that most of my students get, is this kind of diagram here. So the first thing I think is really important for you to do is to find your focus. And what I mean by that is, it's great for you to have multiple interests. It's great for you to have a wide range of skill sets. But when you're going through a job search, you want to have a very clear brand. And so you want to try to focus as much as you can the types of positions that you're looking for. So you don't want to be that person who has one resume that is for software engineering, data analysts, machine learning, like, multiple different types of roles. You want to have that focus as clear as possible. Now, it is okay for you to have, upwards of 2 or 3 focuses, but it becomes more challenging the more different that they are. So for example, you probably wouldn't want to put forth a brand that you are a software developer, a graphic designer, and an accountant. Those are 3 very different areas. But if you find things that are a little bit closer, that's going to make it easier for you. But it's important that you take time to find your focus. So if you don't know what types of positions that you're going to be targeting once you complete your nano degree or are currently working towards now, really spend some time to figure that out, because that's where you should be starting. If you're just wandering aimlessly and applying to whatever sees fit, you're not going to have as much success that way. So try to start with a focus. Then once you have that focus in terms of the types of positions that you're going to want to look for, now you want to create a list of companies. So these should, if you're listening in and wondering, how do I apply this as soon as this ends? Step 1 is to have your focus or refine your focus. Step 2 is to create a list of companies. So you could use something like, you could write it down on paper if you want. I would recommend doing it in like Excel or a Google Sheets, somewhere to where you can organize that list of companies. And you can even have a column for names of people that you've contacted. So it'll help you, give you a little bit more organization to your search process in general. So you have that list of companies, then we can start targeting people who work at those companies. And that is the next step. So I would say, as you're putting together that list of companies, maybe start with like 10. I think that's a good number to kind of have. One of the things to keep in mind, and I want to use this moment to be very realistic with you all, not all of you are going to find jobs at Amazon, Google, Netflix, and Facebook. I probably speak to, about 75% of the Udacity students I talk to say that they want to work at one of those 5 companies. And while that is a great goal, and some of them will actually achieve it, I don't want people's focuses to be at the top companies in the world and only those companies. Because even if you're qualified, you're competing with the best people in the entire world. And so while I'm in full support, I think you should go for it. I think you should do it. Do not be closed-minded to smaller companies, startups, medium-sized companies. I recommend that as you're creating a list, make that list diverse. Include big companies, include medium-sized companies, include startups, as much as you can to diversify your options and give yourself a better chance, especially if you're at a place where you're saying, I really just want a job that's going to allow me to apply the things that I've learned. You'll want to be a little bit more open versus the people out there who are saying, I love my job right now. I'm just taking this nano degree to level up my skills. You could be a little bit more picky with the types of roles that you're looking for and maybe say, okay, I'm going to wait until I get one of those. But it depends on what your priorities are, but you should also keep in mind the level of competition. It's not just about you being qualified. It's also about you beating out some of the best people in the world. So just keep that in mind, not to discourage you once again, but just be realistic through this process as well, because we also have, things going on in the world that are limiting the amount of opportunities as well. So give yourself the best chance and be realistic with your skill set. If you're brand new to what you're learning, you may not be the best candidate for a more competitive company. Whereas if you're brand new and looking for a place to start, a smaller business or a startup might be an ideal starting ground for you. So keep those things in mind as you're creating your list. And if you have any questions about this process, feel free to drop those in the chat, as I mentioned before. But once you take some time to do step one, find your focus or refine your focus, create that list of companies, now you want to start finding strategic connections. So there are a couple of ways that you can do this. One being LinkedIn, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in a little bit. Two is just networking in general. So trying to get involved with professional organizations is a great opportunity. Joining meetup groups. I love meetup groups, and I think that a lot of Udacity students have gained a lot of value from meetup groups. So let me know if in the Zoom chat if you've ever been a part of one or are currently part of one. But I think meetup is great. If you type in meetup.com or you can download the app on your phone, that's a really good place for you to actually join a targeted group. So Meetup is not just professional. It's not just for networking. You can also join meetups. So I might join a meetup group for Nintendo Switch players, or I might join a meetup group for concert goers in Atlanta. But they also have meetup groups that are very specific to your profession. And so they may have meetup groups for data scientists. They may have general groups for just technology professionals. They may have, smaller groups that are a little bit more broad. So it may be like women in marketing or something like that. And so the more specific you can get, the better. But if you can't find those or you're in a less kind of populated area, go with a broader option like, tech professionals or something like that. One thing to note is that Meetup is obviously more so for you to meet up in person, but we can't really do that too much right now. One good thing though is that a lot of Meetup groups are transitioning their events and their programming to be online and to be virtual. And so they're having panels, they're having conferences, they're having workshops, meet and greets, speed networking events. So don't forget about that resource, because they've adapted as well. And another thing to think about is if you are trying to transition to a different location, this is a better opportunity for you to connect with people because they're not necessarily meeting in person. You don't have to be physically located there. So if you are in let's say you're in the US, if you live in Chicago, but you want to move to New York, join a meetup group there and engage with them in these online events now. Or if you are looking to even transition from a different country, you could potentially start getting involved with some of these groups right now. Clayton says, Meetup is an amazing tool. More often than not, a lot of folks I know have found positions through that sort of networking. I have as well. I even hosted a networking jobs fair pre-COVID and had 1,000 people there. There's a huge benefit to Meetup. So yeah, Clayton has had some success with meetups as well. I have, even if they're not professional, I highly encourage you all just get used to networking, because I think where people get nervous as it relates to networking is they focus too much on, I am here to get a job. And people on the receiving end kind of know that, or they can see that from how you're interacting with people. But you should really be approaching these as just a way to start and build relationships with people that you think could potentially be good connections. So it's not just about connecting with people so that they can get you a job. When you go about it that way, you're not going to enjoy networking. I can kind of promise you now, especially if you're someone who feels a little bit more introverted. These online meetups can be a really good place to start. But also, if we get back to meeting in person soon, keep those things in mind when you're at events. Your goal there should be to genuinely connect with people who you are kind of on the same level with, and trying to find things outside of just a job at that company that you want to connect with them over. So there's a question: don't you think it's time consuming? How is it taking care of everything going on in life? So I will say this: it is time consuming. But I will also say that if you want to find a good job, you're better off going this route than applying for jobs online. So this strategy, obviously, you can start to see that this process takes a lot longer than applying for jobs online. But there's there's no timeline that says applying for jobs online gets you a role quicker, because through this process, referrals are by far the #1 way you're going to get interviews and get hired. And so you could be applying for jobs online very quickly for an entire year without finding a new role. Or you could go through this process that could take you a couple of months and find something within 2 to 3 months. But I've seen it happen much quicker for people, but I've also seen it take longer. So it's also important for you to keep in mind that this is not a guarantee. There are no guaranteed strategies out there. This is just what I've found to be the most effective. And even in a long term, I've seen this to be more effective. So it is time consuming, yes, but sometimes that's how you stand out from everybody else. But great question. So yeah, Meetup is a great resource. Also, LinkedIn is extremely valuable here because you can go in and you can actually search that company that is on your list. Search that company. And when you're looking for people to connect with, I would encourage you to, a lot of people just go towards recruiters, or they look for HR directors or HR managers. But you also want to kind of focus on people who are in the roles that you want to be in, because you're not going to have a full out conversation with a recruiter about the future of AI like you would with the machine learning engineer at the company that you want to work for. So I would encourage you to look into trying to find those people. So you can just search on LinkedIn in that search bar. Let's see, ABC company, machine learning engineer. That's a type of position that you're targeting. Search for that on LinkedIn, and then you will get a list of different resources, or I'm sorry, a list of different people who fit that description. And so look at their profiles, go to their profiles, read their profiles, see what it says in their about section. Is there anything there that you can connect with outside of just that company and that job? Look at their experience. Maybe you all have done similar work in the past and they made a transition. So they may have a similar career path. Maybe they worked at the same company that you used to work for or currently work for. Maybe they went to the same university or also completed a nano degree program. These are all things that you can use as a way to break the ice and introduce that conversation. So keep that in mind. Your goal is not to go and find somebody that works for a company that you're interested in working for and asking them, hey, can you submit a referral? This is about taking time to build relationships and invest in networking so that when positions become available, you have a lot better chance to get them as soon as they're available. So yeah, I'll go into that a little bit more in detail on a future slide. But I see Ishmael says Eventbrite app is a great way to find meetups as well. Yes, that's one I forgot to mention. Eventbrite is great. Eventbrite is great for more kind of like pop-up events as well. So it may not be a dedicated meetup group, but you may see that one person is having an event that you're interested in. So you can go on there, and not only is it good for hosting events, but you can actually search and browse by category as well. So yeah, look into that. There may be some other ones that we're not thinking of that might be a little bit more regionally specific. So if you know of any, feel free to drop those in the chat where you're located and if that has worked well for you. Clayton says, I'd also echo what Brett is saying here. When job searching, I search for depth, not breadth of opportunities. Absolutely. Finding at least one event networking opportunity a week will go a lot further than plugging and chugging online. Very, very true. And I would even go to say, you know, you could at least do one a month. If you're active in a job search, you should be doing something closer to a week. But one of the things that I encourage people to think about, you know, once you find that new role, or if you're in your role and you're currently happy, Do not see a job search as something that you start and stop every time you're looking for a role. These are things that you should be doing throughout your entire career so that each time you make a career transition, it's much smoother. So if you're in a job that you absolutely love, you should still be networking. If you just started a job, you should still be connecting with people at companies that you want to work for someday. This is not a start and stop thing that you do. And the more that you do it consistently, the easier the process gets to where, if you're moving on to kind of a further step, doing some personal branding, you're sometimes avoiding the need to job search at all because people are reaching out to you. Let's see. What do I ask, talk to employee, let's say in Netflix that fit my background? Sorry for having a naive question. Yeah, so I think, I won't give a template. I would never give like a guidelines. I think you have to realize you're talking to people. And so you have to be able to connect with them first and foremost. So there's nothing I would say like you should say this. I think it's just important for you to read their profile and genuinely try to connect with them. If you're going through that list of people and you say, you know what, I could see myself having a friendship or a professional relationship with this person, even if it didn't lead to a job. Those are the people that you want to be reaching out to because it's going to make that connection much stronger and kind of fast track that referral process in a lot of cases. So yeah, um, that's where that networking and building relationships comes in. So, outside of just connecting with them for the first time, that's not always enough. Sometimes if you are able to find those people that you have a lot in common with, it can be as quick as one meeting or one phone call or one video chat. It's happened several times for me where, I've met somebody at a company that I'm interested in and they say, if you ever need a referral, please let me know. But then on the other hand, there have also been situations where I was like, we didn't really talk about much. Maybe I shouldn't ask for that right off the bat. I need to spend more time investing in this relationship. Let me mark that down in my document and plan to follow up with them in a month. And then, you build that relationship and you find opportunities to help each other. And that's what gets people to want to help you as well. Um, so yeah, and then personal branding is kind of the next step. So if the first part of this seems like you kind of need to start from scratch and it's going to take a while for you to do this, that's okay. Personal branding, I would say, is kind of the next step. So once you get comfortable through this process, and this doesn't mean that you have to complete the first three in order to get there. You can be doing all of these things at once. But personal branding is really impactful because basically what you're doing is you are showcasing that you are an expert and you're publicizing that in a sense to where if you were to use a platform like LinkedIn, let's say, so you go on LinkedIn and you type a post, once a week sharing the future of digital marketing, that is going to show to people that you're an expert in digital marketing. So when they have an opening or they hear of an opening at their company, they may think, I should reach out to that one person who's always posting about it because they're an expert. And so you want to kind of be seen as that through creating your own content, whether that's just quick posts on LinkedIn. It could be writing articles on LinkedIn. It could be writing articles on a platform like Medium. It could be you sharing what projects you're working on and include links to GitHub so people can connect with you there. But really, it's just about getting the word out about the work that you're doing. So, through public speaking, getting featured in articles, writing articles, showing up to events frequently so people know who you are, posting quickly on social media can go really far. And this is what kind of leads you into that area of where you are putting out feelers for people to reach out to you. It's kind of like marketing. But you're treating yourself as the business and your customers are potential employers. So it probably is one of the most impactful, but also one of the more difficult strategies. So if this seems a little bit outside of your comfort zone right now, that's perfectly fine. But get comfortable with some of these other areas so that when you think about adding personal branding to your search strategy, you can be more effective with it. And obviously, you might have questions or concerns about this working. If you need to follow up, this is a great topic to kind of follow up on. Usually after I go through my first coaching call with Udacity students kind of covering this topic, we will plan our follow-up session to talk about their LinkedIn profiles. So I'm also going to try to make a note to include the link to that webinar as well, because LinkedIn is really impactful in all of these areas, and you want to make sure that you have a really solid profile to get started. So I'll try to share that link as well, maybe the next time I ask for you some feedback. And then lastly is kind of that awareness. So we see how that's different from the first, the first slide about reactive job searching, where you're aware of it and then you apply. This is kind of doing everything before that that opportunity has even become available. So you very well could be spending all of this time for a job opening that is not going to exist. But it is likely that, you know, for the companies that you're targeting, if you're targeting companies that would, you know, likely hire someone with your skill set, you'd be surprised how quickly this can happen. And so when you do see, oh, so-and-so is hiring, they're on my list, let me reach out to my connection. And then you can say, hey, I saw that you have an opening. Would you mind submitting a referral for my application, or sending the application materials to your hiring manager? At that point, you're not sending that to a stranger. This is someone you've taken a little bit of time to get to know. You've established that it's okay for you to reach out to them for help, that you've also showcased ways that you plan to make the relationship mutually beneficial. And so it becomes less of an ask there. One of the things that I would also include is when you're creating that list of companies, go to their application website, their HR website. A lot of them allow you to sign up for email alerts when positions become available. So as soon as they're open, you can go ahead and reach out to that person and really jump on it. The other thing is, you know, as I mentioned before, sometimes they might reach out to you. This was probably 2 years ago, I was looking to make a transition from higher ed into campus recruiting. And I found somebody who worked at, you know, one of the top companies on my list. And I said, oh yeah, he made this same transition. Let me meet with him. And so he and I had a really good conversation about how he made that transition. And I just shared how much I was kind of interested in doing that work. And then I want to say like a month and a half later, he said, hey, one of our team members is leaving. Send me your resume so I can share it with my supervisor. So this was before a position was even made available online. And I was interviewing for a position that hadn't even been posted. So it can sometimes guarantee a first round interview, at least a chance for you to share what you can do for them. So it does work. I've seen it work extremely well. And the other thing too is like, this may take a little bit longer, but the idea of this is to get you into the companies that you want to work for, doing what you want to do, versus just finding a job that you found online kind of haphazardly. So it provides a little bit more intention. And so this may be your long-term strategy while you continue working on a short-term strategy as well. But then again, we only have, you know, a certain amount of hours in the day to do this. So I would recommend this route if you want to experience a little bit more success, but it can sometimes take a little bit longer, but it can also take longer if you're just applying online. So you know, at the end of the day, you have humans making decisions, and we can never control that. So let's see. So you're advising to contact and build a relationship with other engineers in the targeted company. Why don't we contact the recruiters directly? So that's a good question. And it's not just for engineers, anybody who's kind of looking to build relationships online. You are doing this instead of recruiters because guess what everybody else is doing? They're reaching out directly to the recruiters. And so sometimes it's just a matter of finding people whose inboxes aren't flooded with messages every single day. It's also about connecting with people who have actually done the transition that you're trying to do. A recruiter hasn't gotten a job as an engineer at that company. That person has. So they can talk to you about what they had to showcase in their interview, what they put on their resume, what they're currently looking for on their team. And then sometimes those people who are actually on the team are the ones who are interviewing you beyond the recruiter making the connection. So, you know, oftentimes some recruiters will kind of find the person and then pass them off to the team who's actually going to be working with them. So reaching out to the people in those roles is more impactful for a lot of different reasons. You can still contact recruiters by all means, but I would not limit it to that. I think you'll have more success with reaching out to people who are in those roles. But still reach out to recruiters because there might be some who are a little bit more responsive, a little bit more friendly and more willing to help, but that's not always the case from what I've seen in the hiring industry. So yeah, just be aware, not every single thing that I say is going to relate relate directly to every single person, but just take what you believe, take what you don't, and kind of leave everything else. But yeah, just take these things into account and keep in mind as you're putting together an actual strategy. So this can actually serve as your plan. You've got your focus, your target companies, you're keeping track of the people that you're reaching out to, you're attending networking events within your industry. One thing about that list is that list does not necessarily need to be static, so it can change. You could have a conversation with somebody and realize you don't want to work there, and you can take that off your list. You may have a conversation with someone you meet in a virtual meetup group, and they say, I work for XYZ company, and I absolutely love it here. You might then add that to your list of companies, and now you already have a connection there that you can continue furthering that relationship. So there's a lot of benefits to doing this outside of just job searching. If you are freelancing, or if you are looking to start your own business someday, this is still relevant. I don't think people realize that, like, relationships are what rule the world. And so, whether that's job searching, building a business, dating, everything is really focused on you being able to connect with people so that they trust you and will support you in your own goals. So yeah, let's keep moving. Great questions so far. Now I want to get into some specifics that you might already have some questions about. So before we jump into that, feel free to hop back in the chat. I know I talked at you for a while, and I want to make sure that you guys get a chance to talk at me a little bit. So feel free to drop in what companies you're targeting. I'm interested in knowing and hearing from you all. Don't be discouraged by anything that I shared. I just want to know what ones you're currently targeting. Juan says, how would this strategy change when you are looking for a career change? That is when you have work experience, but you're looking for a new job. So I would say that this strategy doesn't change too much. I think if you are making a transition or a career change, you really, really should use that strategy, because if you're making a career change and you're applying online, the only thing that speaks for you is your resume, which is not going to be as competitive as those people who have several years of experience doing that same job. And so through those relationships, you have people who are willing to kind of put their reputation on the line to say, hey, I know Juan, I know he's been really learning this new skill, I know he can do this job. He's not, necessarily our ideal candidate, but I think we should give him an interview. Those are things that are going to happen. People are not going to take a look at your resume and say, oh, you were doing this for 10 years and now you're doing this, we should give you a chance. I don't think you're going to see that as frequently. I think you have to always approach it from a business perspective and think, would I hire this person who I'm taking a chance on? And it's not even about hiring sometimes. Sometimes it's about, am I picking the best candidates to actually interview? And you have people with traditional backgrounds that make more sense versus something that's a little bit different. You might wonder, well, why in the heck is this person applying for this job? So that's where that networking comes in and is a lot more beneficial when you go into it with intention, because anytime you make a career change, it's going to be challenging. The employers are not going to see an online course or a university degree or a nano degree and say, that's the reason why we should hire this person. I think you have to find unique ways to, use your nano degree, because that's building your skills. Find ways to apply those skills and that experience to real world problems that, other businesses need help with, that you can volunteer to do and whatnot. And then you need to build your network. That's for everybody, but I think all three of those things are emphasized for people who are making a career change. But yeah, that's a great question. But yeah, what companies are you all targeting? Let me know in the chat box. I'm focusing on the fashion industry, but really not closing any doors. Okay, that's interesting. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is check in on the fashion industry. I'm sure they're doing pretty well in terms of like online sales, but that might help you, give you a better idea of which types of companies to target. Obviously, the ones that are focused on the more brick and mortar are probably struggling a little bit right now with social distancing. So some of those companies that might be more pushing their online brands could be really, really cool to target. Indeed. So Indeed is more like a job board, a job searching website, but you might also be searching for a job there. I don't know. Tech companies. Okay. Let's see, Daimler, Mercedes. So I'm assuming that's probably a self-driving car person. My background experience is in healthcare, so my job search is in that scope. So that's a good point to bring up. So if you are looking to make a transition, you're going to want to find ways to make that, I say, to kind of decorate that bridge, right? So if you're making a transition from one thing to a next, try to find ways to make that easier. So maybe that's you staying in the same industry, or maybe that's you working towards an industry that your background is in or your previous education is in, so that you have more credibility of just working in that industry, even if it's not so much working in that specific position. Suzanne's looking for venture capitalists with startup companies. Okay, great. Tony has a couple: Splunk, Dropbox, Everlaw, smaller companies in Chicago as I'm thinking of moving. So yeah, Meetup could be a really great opportunity for you, as well as reaching out to people on LinkedIn. Medical imaging, tech, medical. So yeah, anything in the healthcare industry that involves IT is obviously going to be booming, and was booming pre-COVID and will continue to boom post-COVID. So that's great. Banking, finance is also not taking too many hits, at least in terms of like their industry in general. The ones that are focused primarily online, they're doing fine because things haven't changed too much from them. Yeah, and then aerospace, hopefully it'll survive through COVID. Yes. I'm looking for auditing consulting companies. Okay, great. So that is helpful for me. Thank you all for taking some time to share that. So yeah, we talked a little bit about this. So this will be a little bit of review. So as far as the networking and relationship building goes, here are a couple of in-person options, traditionally in-person options. Obviously, a lot of them have transitioned online, so they're still great resources. One of the things I hadn't mentioned previously is the one-on-one coffee or lunch chats. So when things do get back to normal, or as close as normal as we're going to get, one of the things I encourage you to do is, if you have the budget or are willing to spend the money, offer to buy people lunch to have a conversation with them, especially if you feel like you don't have a whole lot to offer in the initial stages of your relationship. So for example, some of the previous experiences I mentioned, I offered to buy someone lunch, and at the end of that conversation, they said if I needed a referral, I could reach out to them. The good thing about that is they ended up saying, no, I'm okay with just meeting around like 2 p.m. And so, just offering alone can sometimes, showcase to them that you're serious and that you value their time. That's really what it's about. But I think if you are interested in meeting someone at a company and learning from their experience, you do want to think about how can you provide value to their situation as well. You don't want it to be one-sided, because then that person's going to be less likely to want to continue to engage with you. So a very effective strategy that I've used, not only for my own career, but also for my business. I think having a face-to-face conversation over food is just always a bonding experience. So consider that when things get a little bit closer to normal. And then online, I mentioned these, LinkedIn and online communities, but your goal is to, what I quoted, take your conversations offline, which would ideally be in person or face-to-face one-on-one, but I would transition that to also include one-on-one phone calls, virtual chat. So if you meet at an Eventbrite event, or you meet at a meetup group, try to actually have a phone call or a video chat with the people that you're meeting one-on-one. You want to kind of further that relationship, and that one-on-one is going to be best, especially if you can do video, because it's the closest to face-to-face that we're going to get for a while. So try to always take that conversation one-on-one, but also take it offline if you can, and when things get back to normal. That's going to help you further build those relationships. So here are a couple of tips, and I shared a couple of these before, but just to kind of give you a breakdown, you can also kind of screenshot this or take a quick pic to keep all of these in mind before you start reaching out to people. So you can use the search feature, as I mentioned before, to find someone at the company on your list. Then you want to review those results, and you want to kind of go through their profile and see if you have things in common, or if you can find things in common. Another thing that I hadn't mentioned previously is, when you look at somebody's profile, you can also check between usually their top section, where it has their about, their summary, and their experience. For the people who are a little bit more active on LinkedIn, they will have a bar there that says activity. And that's helpful to look at, because if they liked a post a day ago and commented on a post 2 days ago, one, they're more likely to see your message because they're fairly active on LinkedIn. But two, considering the fact that they're engaging with their community, they probably bought into the idea of LinkedIn a little bit more and may be more willing to have a conversation and network, because that's really what the platform is built to do. Versus, somebody who you don't see that activity bar, meaning they're probably not very active, or you go click on their activity and they commented on a post 3 months ago. That might not be the best person to reach out to, because chances are they're not logging in as frequently, so they might not even see your message, or they're just not bought into this idea of connecting, and they just kind of have their LinkedIn to post whenever they get a new job or update their resume, which is what we want to get away from. But yeah, so that's a good thing to take a look at. And then also just try to find something that you have in common, or as I mentioned, take an interest in their work. So if you see that they've written a post or written an article or have an event coming up, invest in that, go read, or go tune into their webinar, their live or whatever, and, follow up with a message and say, hey, I attended the webinar that you did through the Women in Tech meetup. I'd love to have a conversation about your what you said about blank, and then you start having a conversation with that person. They've seen that you've taken an interest in them beyond just kind of a job at their company. Let's see the question. How does it work between genders, female, male? Just thinking in my mind, I'm talking about networking. Yeah, that's a good question. So I will say that I'm primarily speaking from a US lens. I haven't had the experience of doing a whole lot of networking internationally other than with students, but I do get this question here and there, so I think it is sometimes a cultural thing, where trying to meet up with someone one-on-one might be seen as a little bit more flirtatious or towards the dating end. I think it's important for you to make clear what your goals are in that case from that conversation. Also, potentially offer to meet in a very public place so that people don't feel nervous or afraid. I think that those are good options to think about, but also be aware of cultural differences and how that might play into effect. But if you're uncomfortable with that, I would say just start that conversation online, and make it clear to them that you're not interested in a dating relationship or something personal. You want it to be a little bit more so professional. I think that's okay. Oh, okay, so you're located in the US. So yeah, I don't think that it's too out of the norm for people to ask to meet up on LinkedIn. I think that that's fairly common, but you can, if they're nervous, just make it clear to them what your goals are. And then, yeah, you want to make that connection and break the ice to start that conversation. So you're not just starting that conversation with, hey, stranger, I want to have a video chat with you. You're taking some time to kind of break the ice, ask them questions. I recently reached out to a lot of different people in my industry as a way to build my network during the downtime. And I asked them a question at the end. I said, how do you think that, what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing with career services from a distance or working remotely? Just a way to break the ice and start the conversation. And then these are just a couple of things to keep in mind. I like to remind people that you will get ignored. It is going to happen. And so go into this knowing that, and don't get too disappointed when you don't hear back from people, because it is just going to happen. We get busy. We don't want to feel like we're bombarded from people who aren't necessarily adding value to our situation sometimes. And so we all get caught up in this. So just keep in mind that you will get ignored. It's okay. But then also to be persistent and follow up. So if you reach out to somebody and they didn't reply, or they replied and the conversation ended, reach back out to them a week later and follow up. And if they don't respond from there, then it might be time to take a hint that they're not that interested. So yeah. Just to kind of get a recap of the thing, if you didn't get a chance to kind of see it all in action, we're targeting companies, refining our focus, finding connections, building those relationships further, or building them through networking, doing some personal branding that's kind of outside of what we chatted about today. I'll include the link to those webinars so you have access to that. And then you have that kind of awareness of the job openings. So then at that point, you try to reach back out and say, hey, friend, can you submit a referral for me? That is going to work much better than if you try to kind of skip steps and jump directly to that. What if I sent my resume to a company and I was ignored? Should I still try to get a connection there? Yeah, I think that that's okay. I think, you know, for the most part, the people that you're trying to reach out to may not have even known that you applied there or seen your application. It might have even got filtered out. So I would say it's still worth it to try. Let's skip this because we don't have a ton of time. Um, so I do want to end just a little bit early so that we can get to Q&A. And while you all type in your questions, I am going to take a second to get those links ready for you all. So since we skipped that, I just want to give you that. They're going to be full sessions like this one, so you don't have to watch them all. I know it can get tiring listening to me for an entire hour. But I'm going to go grab those links. But yeah, let me know in the chat if you have any questions, and we'll circle back when I get those links to you all. So yeah, feel free to type those in the chat right now. If you got what you were hoping to gain from this session, feel free to jump off the call. Thank you so much for attending. But if you have questions or want those links, go ahead and type them in the chat and I'll grab those right now. Feel free to jump on your microphone as well if you want to speak up. And actually, I'm going to share my screen so that I can show you all where these are located as well. Okay, let's see. Okay, so really all you have to do is go to YouTube and type in Udacity. And then Udacity has a very, well-developed YouTube presence. There's almost 30,000 videos. If you navigate to, oh, I'm sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. If you navigate to the playlists, you'll find the playlist that all of our career webinars are on. So I think it's even a little bit further over here. Yeah, so career coaching events, we have 53 different videos there. So if you go to that, and the reason why I wanted to show this is because for those of you who are watching the replay, you won't be able to see the links in the chat. But you can see we have a full list of webinars here. This is the last time we did this session specifically, but if you keep looking, there are ones around remote jobs, there are ones about assessing cultural fit, and if you scroll down, this is one that I mentioned, how can I gain experience when nobody will hire me? That's one for you to explore different options for you to gain experience if you are making somewhat of a career transition. And then the other one is the LinkedIn Guide to Interviews Without Applying. So that one is focused primarily on your profile and making sure that you have a really strong profile to put forward. And then the part two is a little bit more advanced. That's getting into the personal branding topics that we talked about. And that's going to showcase to you how best to engage in other people's posts as well as to create your own content. So hopefully that was helpful. I'm actually going to just show that and not drop the links so that I can get to these questions before we run out of time. But yeah, if you need help just accessing that, just search Udacity on YouTube and navigate that playlist. Let's see, how to appropriately evaluate your skills. So if you could just be a little bit more specific in that question, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. Feel free to just clarify in the chat. Oh, you attended a webinar before. Yes, thank you for attending. Let's see, how to appropriately evaluate your skills. So yeah, I think if you could just provide a little bit more context to that, that would be really helpful for me to understand what you're really trying to ask or get at. But I think that is really important to do, is to review job descriptions. So even if you are kind of not currently job searching, but know what your ideal next step is, this is a great activity to do. Start looking at those job descriptions now and use that as a roadmap to get to that point. So if there are, different platforms that you need to learn or different experiences that you need to gain, try to do those in advance so that when it is time for your job search, it's not so much making a jump. It's kind of like, yeah, I've prepared for this. So yeah, that's a great way to kind of evaluate your skills and see, if I'm applying for these jobs, what are the common things that I'm seeing? So maybe look at 4 or 5 job descriptions and say, okay, all of them are asking for me to have this experience. And while I learned it in my nano degree, I don't have the experience. Then you know what experience you should be trying to find or create for yourself. Let's see. I generally get positive feedback from Udacity, but I just got really negative one from the same project from a company. So yeah, that's a little bit different. This I would say, you know, potentially reach out to your group on Student Hub or just on Student Hub in general and see if anybody else can share some ideas or feedback. But I personally am not kind of a technical expert, so I wouldn't necessarily know too much about that. I think if it's in relation to your application materials, I would encourage kind of going through some of those webinars because those are a lot more targeted and specific than some of the on-demand content. Even though that's great, it's just kind of a great start. And then also you have the option to follow up with a career coach and kind of go through that as well. So I think it depends on what you're asking. But yeah. They told startups are not a safe option. They always go for downsizing. What's your opinion? So I know that, you know, it's like anything else. You know, you could have a very positive experience. A lot of people like startups because they require them to, you know, wear multiple hats. So they may be doing one thing and doing another thing and doing another thing and enjoying that experience of the variety. Whereas at a bigger company, you may be just doing this one thing and that's all they want you to do. They don't want you to take on additional projects. They don't want you to learn about anything else. They want you to do that one job. So sometimes startups can be a little bit riskier. Obviously, they don't have as much financial founding as a lot of major companies, but it's a case by case basis. You know, I would say even if you have 5 friends who have had horrible startup experiences, that doesn't mean that your startup experience is going to be bad. So you have to like think critically about their experiences, what they didn't like, learn from that. If all of them were in, you know, the media industry, maybe lean towards something else, but reflect on that and think critically about where you could be different. If you are still considering startups, it is a little bit riskier, but there are benefits as well. And they're willing to take risks on people a lot more than some bigger companies. Let's see. There was a question. I did my master's and looking for a job for 7 months. Right now I'm learning predictive analytics and it has no link to my master's degree. Which strategy shall I go with? So I think it would help to know what your master's degree was in, but that could be a good way for you to kind of bring them together. So maybe you do predictive analytics in the industry where you got your master's degree or where you have some expertise or some experience so that you can, you know, at least show that like this is an intentional effort, that I learned this and I'm applying this at the same time. But I think ultimately it's up to you, and you know, it depends on your priorities. Are you willing to wait out a longer job search for something that you really want, or do you need to get in a role sooner and you have to be a little bit more aggressive in that process and be open to different opportunities? Let's see, does Udacity offer prepping for an online job interview? Yeah, so I mean, we are here to kind of help you with everything as it relates to the job search process. So if you want to, and there may be a webinar on that as well. I would just double check. You know, schedule some time to chat with the coaching team. Take advantage of the resources. If I were a Udacity student, I would use every single one of the coaching sessions that I get. I would watch most of the webinars that relate to me. There's so much value in those that I have not seen elsewhere on the internet in general. So really take advantage of that. If you do have access to coaching calls, we can help you with your application materials. We can help you with your networking strategy. We can help you with your LinkedIn profile. We can help you write a cover letter. We can help you prepare for an interview. We can do a mock interview. We can talk salary negotiation. You know, we're here to help you with all of the things, you know, as much as we can. But I will say, just keep in mind for the careers team, we're not the technical experts. So you shouldn't be scheduling a call with us to ask about your upcoming technical interview and what you should do to prepare for that. We're more so kind of on the general side of things, and you know, keep in mind that we're not developers on the career side. Let's take a couple more questions. I see there are 3 more questions. So I'll take these and then we're going to jump off and you guys are going to enjoy the rest of your day. So some recruiters ask to send the application alongside with the predicted salary. What do you suggest, and should it be arranged? So That's tough because some situations they have you like put in a thing and you can't include a range. I would say if you can, always include a range. If not, give them something somewhere in the middle. If you're trying to figure out what that range is, I would suggest using something like payscale.com or salary.com or even LinkedIn's salary feature to search the job titles that you're interviewing for, as well as the location, because your location determines things like cost of living and that factors into your salary. So a lot of those websites will actually give you a range to where you have the low end and the high end and the medium end, and you have to kind of critically think and evaluate, where do I fall based on my qualifications and experiences, and then you go with kind of that range that you're creating. As a student looking for remote jobs on data analytics, what strategy should I use? So I think you can still use the same strategy of finding companies that are remote first. There are a lot of companies that were working fully remotely even before COVID-19 who are still looking specifically with people with your expertise. So you can still try to connect with people at those companies in advance if you have any remote companies that are at the top of your list. The other thing that I would say is there is a webinar that I did on finding remote jobs. Check that out, but just keep in mind, think, if I was going to work remotely, what are the things that I would want to see on a resume, that I would want to hear in an interview? So keep in mind communication, teamwork, project management, all the things that make working remotely difficult, because those are the things they're going to be looking for outside of just your expertise in data analytics. Let's see. Yeah. So yeah, the playlists on YouTube. So you can just go to YouTube, search for Udacity, go to Udacity's page, and then under the page, there's a tab for playlists. If you click on that playlist and you gotta, I think, kind of scroll over a little bit, you'll see the playlist for career webinars. And then there are 53 of those. And so you can just scroll through, and I would just say, watch the ones that pique your interest. Most of them are around an hour. And the cool thing is it's YouTube. So you can pause and you can replay it and you can do whatever. I tell all of my students, if you're watching the LinkedIn one, go through that section, pause it, change your profile, go back, rewatch anything you might need to, change it, and continue doing that as you make progress. But yeah, thank you all so much for attending today. I appreciate the engagement in the chat box as well. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for the team that helped facilitate this. I appreciate you all staying engaged throughout the entire presentation. I hope this was helpful. I hope you start implementing some of these things and start to see some progress. But outside of that, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you're interested in connecting. I have a lot of content on there as well, and we can just kind of keep in contact there. So yeah, thank you all so much for attending, and have a great rest of your day.